being loved and loving. That is what this Interior Integration for Catholics podcast is all about, and that is what this episode is specifically about. Welcome to episode 157, a new and better way to embrace love and to love back. What are we doing? We're working on embracing your identity as a beloved little son or daughter of God, to receive that love of God and to love back with your whole heart. That is what we are all about. Matthew 22. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. If we understand our human nature better, if we understand human formation better, if we understand how we can love ourselves better in a relational way, it makes it so much easier for us to follow the two great commandments, to love God and to love our neighbor. And not just to love God with our will, the faculty of the will, but to love God with all your heart, your whole heart, wholeheartedly loving God, loving Him with all your soul, all your mind. That's more than just the will. As important as the faculty of the will is, your whole heart, your whole soul, your whole mind, it's more than just your will. In order to facilitate this and this podcast at Souls and Hearts as well in general, we draw insights from all the secular sciences, in accordance with paragraph 62 of the Vatican II document on the pastoral constitution of the Church in the modern world. And that reads, in pastoral care, sufficient use must be made not only of theological principles, but also of the findings of the secular sciences, especially of psychology and sociology, so that the faithful may be brought to a more adequate and mature life of faith. Throughout all of 2025, we will be bringing in the insights from internal family systems, a model, an approach developed by Dr. Richard Schwartz, and harmonize them with the truths of the Catholic faith to help you live out the three great loves and the two great commandments, to love God, your neighbor, and yourself. And I believe IFS has so much to offer us with that. Bringing in so many of our Souls and Hearts staffs this year to share with you how the insights from IFS and other parts and systems approaches can help you overcome obstacles and deficits in your human formation. And again, why? So that you can love better. So, I'm excited about this. Let's get on with it. I am Dr. Peter Malinowski, also known as Dr. Peter. I am your host and guide in this Interior Integration for Catholics podcast. I'm so glad to be with you. I'm a clinical psychologist, a trauma therapist, a podcaster, a writer, the co-founder and president of Souls and Hearts, but most of all, I'm a beloved little son of God, a passionate Catholic who wants to help you to taste and see the height and depth and breadth and warmth and the light of the love of God, especially God your Father. And also, Mary your mother, your spiritual parents, God the Father, Mary your mother, your primary parents. I'm here to help you embrace your identity as a beloved little child of God and Mary. Now, I'm super excited because in this episode, my co-host is Marion Moreland. Marion is a level 3 certified internal family systems therapist and guide with a master's of science in clinical counseling, and she is a master traumatologist. Rooted deeply in her Catholic faith, Marion was trained at Divine Mercy University through the Catholic Christian meta model of the person, where she now serves as adjunct faculty. This unique framework enables her to see the inherent dignity and God-given uniqueness of every person, guiding them toward a flourishing life. And this is particularly important to me in Souls and Hearts. As the lead navigator for the resilient Catholics community in Souls and Hearts, Marion works to support human formation through the integration of internal family systems and a Catholic anthropology. In addition to helping individuals deepen their self-understanding and healing, she also offers consultations for helping professionals who wish to integrate faith and IFS into their practice. Marion's been married for 40 years. She's blessed with 3 daughters and 10 grandchildren. Marion finds joy in dancing, home projects, and traveling for pleasure. Join her on this podcast with me to explore the intersection of faith, psychology, and personal growth, and to discover how to live a flourishing, God-centered life. So, Marion, it is so good. It is so good to have you with us today. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Peter. It's really good to be here.
And I am really excited to introduce our guest expert, the one who will be kind of leading our conversation today, and that is David Edwards. He is an IFS therapist. He's the founder of St. Joseph Counseling, where he sees clients and runs consultation groups for therapists about practicing IFS from a Catholic perspective. David was also trained at Divine Mercy University in clinical mental health counseling through the Catholic Christian metamodel of the person. More recently, he is the president of a new professional association in Arizona called Catholic Therapists Arizona. David and I have gotten to know each other in both the Formation for Formators community and the Resilient Catholics community. He is also the lead facilitator for the Love One Another group. That's an advanced human formation group in the Formation for Formators group, or Formators. Therapists, coaches, spiritual directors, and others who accompany work in loving our neighbors in their parts in a very deliberate way. David has been married for 10 years. He has 3 daughters and a 1-year-old son. And aside from therapy and wrestling with his children, he enjoys racing in triathlons, flying remote-controlled helicopters, and taking on extra projects around the house. All right, so such a great team. So excited to have you with us, David. Just awesome to be able to spend some time together. I'm so looking forward to this episode.
Thank you, Peter. Really great to be here.
Well, you know what? I just want to turn this over to you, David. Like, what do you think? What do you think we need to know? This episode is sort of an introduction to internal family systems. I know you've been working in this modality for years now. When somebody's just first coming into contact with IFS, what is it that they may most need to know?
The thing that immediately maybe comes to mind, that maybe when I'm sitting with somebody and they're kind of opening up, their life and their struggles and why they're coming to see me, is that I want them to know that everything that's going on inside of them, that it makes sense, that there's kind of a rhyme and reason to it all, that it's not just random, whatever thoughts, feelings, whatever inner conflicts they have, whatever negative emotions they keep on, or behaviors they keep on wrestling with, that it's not just this random assortment of stuff that the best you could hope for is to kind of figure out how to cope with it, but that you can make sense of all of this, and not just in kind of this heady analytical way to figure it out, but to really, really going to what you started with today, or what the podcast is about, to really know that the person can really know themselves and love themselves. And that's a thing I love about this approach, is that it gives us a way to kind of step away from really rejecting or exiling or despising ourselves in some way, or hating whatever's going on inside, in a way to actually love ourselves, even the parts of us that do bad things, or things that we don't like, or that we can actually love them, and that love can bring the changes, the shifting, inside that we really need. And so that's, IFS is what I've found, most helpful as a way to make sense of and bring that love to ourselves that we are needing. And then to love others more freely, to love God more freely, more fully.
Yeah, I love it. So where does one start? If one is like, okay, this sounds interesting, where do they start with this relating to oneself, loving oneself? What's the sort of launching point, or the sort of departure point in this new way of thinking about oneself, or conceptualizing what's going on inside?
Yeah. Yeah. So you're meaning where do we start with ourselves? Where do we start in
Yeah,
our inner
yeah,
world? Yeah. Well, probably the first thing, if we're going to look at it through this model, which I suppose is what we're doing, is is that you have parts that all of these, the thoughts, the feelings, the inner conflict, the struggles, the behaviors you don't like, all that stuff, right? It's all, every piece of it is connected in some way with a part of you, and that each part has its own reasons for thinking and feeling and behaving in the ways that it does. And each part has its own kind of distinct memories, its own um, experiences that it's kind of held on to or maybe felt stuck in, its own patterns. And so that's the first thing is like you have parts. And I suppose that will be the thing we're going to talk a little more about is what do we mean? What do I mean when I say that we have
yeah.
parts?
That's what I think might be coming to mind is okay. So, what is a part? Is it like a mood? Is it is it like some sort of temporary state of being, a mode of operating? Like what, kind of give us a little bit about what these parts are.
Yeah, yeah. So definition of parts. I'm going to start with your definition that you've used before and that I have here in front of me. So I used to do this thing. It was like definition time with Dr. Peter, and then there was like a tune that played. So if you want to insert that there, you can, or we'll just pretend like it was there. So parts, parts feel like, this is Dr. Peter's definition, parts feel like separate, independently operating personalities within us, each with its own unique, prominent needs, roles in our lives, emotions, body sensations, guiding beliefs and assumptions, typical thoughts, intentions, desires, attitudes, impulses, interpersonal style, and worldview. Each part also has an image of God. And I would add maybe each part has uh, an image being this kind of assumption or experience of who God is. Each part also has ideas about who God is, as well as about who I am myself, an image and ideas about who I myself am as a person, and even about the rest of the world and about others. Each part might have its own perspective about what the world is like. Uh, and what other people in my life are like, and what other people in general are like.
Marion, I'm curious, you obviously have been doing this for quite a while too. What strikes you about parts? And as we kind of like catch up with like, all right, if we kind of try to wrap our mind around, what might be for some of our listeners, some of our viewers, really a new thought here.
Yeah. What always stands out to me, and it feels like it comes up usually pretty quickly with clients, is wait a sec, are you talking like multiple personality parts? And I think it's so important to say, no, not that. There's a very different sort of situation going on with someone who has, been diagnosed with something like dissociative identity disorder. We're not talking about that. We're just talking about this inner system that works in us that kind of drives us. A part of me says I should go to work today. A part of me says we should sleep in all day. You know, we all have that, right?
I like that, Marion. It's so kind of, we use this colloquially. Most people can resonate at that level with the idea of parts. Like part of me wants to, you know, be a gentle, patient, loving, kind father, and then this other part of me just jumps in, and it's like, when my kids are being this or that way, and just like loses it a little bit. Uh,
Yeah, for sure. It is. And they talk about therapists that do IFS as being parts detectors, but I really think if we listen just even in the vernacular TV, books, literature, we hear this language because it's natural. It's part of like how we are. We're not introducing some foreign concept. Yes, at times it feels a little weird when we say we're going to talk to our parts, but if we can really back up and see this is really how we function.
Mhm.
When did you, I'm just curious for the both of you, when did you first come into contact with a part? Was there like a part that helped you to kind of come to the conclusion that, hey, this is like a real thing? You know, like, hey, if you don't mind sharing, like, if it feels right and good to kind of share something about, like, was there a part of you that taught you that parts exist? Something like that.
Well, yes, very much so. Um, I didn't come into IFS through the clinical world. I came in through it doing some personal work on parts around eating specifically. And so my first part I met was my food manager, which now I kind of refer to as my health guru. We've had a little negotiation. But yeah, this part was really good at its job. It could put me on diets. It could tell me what to exercise. It made me do an undergrad degree in sports and health science for you know, I was an accountant beforehand. That made sense, right? Um, but this part has the capacity to really drive me hard. And so that was the first part I met. And then it followed quickly that, yeah, there's a counterpart to this. There's a part that says, nope, we aren't doing that. And so that was kind of my sequencing was I kind of learned these two parts right up front. What about you, David?
Mhm. Yeah, I could definitely share my own. I was introduced to IFS more on the clinical side after I'd already been practicing a little bit as a therapist, and some of my colleagues were bringing it to me. Some of the folks here in the Formation for Formators community, um, and then I was kind of skeptical and was like, this is just another angle on the same old stuff, and um, just another way to conceptualize things. So I didn't really get the depth of what it really was, but the first part that I met once I was kind of willing to let myself experience a little bit and have a colleague kind of take me through some things was and it's the one I already mentioned that I didn't exactly say was my own part, but like the father who gets impatient part and just wants my kids to just be the way I want them to be, and and this part has had maybe a few names, but he's uh, the one that's really stuck, which initially was really how he showed up as my coach, and in the kind of put some kind of imagery to it was this guy's like coaching a football team that is just not doing well, and he's mad and he's pacing up and down the sidelines and he's spitting and cussing, and he's got his clipboard, he's throwing it on the ground, breaking it over his knee and whatnot, and he could just like really be real real frustrated and impatient and whatnot. And um I still often call him my coach these days, but there are different kinds of coaches out there. There are coaches like that, and then there are coaches who are deeply committed to their teams and that they're patient and gentle, and maybe they you know can also kind of drill down a little bit and say like, let's get it together, guys, we got this, but also like but just much more of an encourager. So another word maybe is like an inner critic. This part was a critic, and sometimes is, but when it really is operating well, really in a mode that really works well for him and for the rest of my own parts and my children, um, then he's more of an encourager. He um, inspires and impels people forward, my own parts and others in my life. So this very different way of coaching.
Yeah, that's just such great imagery, right? To kind of say, yeah, this is this is what happens. This is the way that I am, in a sense, right? When these parts are very prominent. And Marion, you sort of brought up the conflict between, two of your parts, right? That's often a way that we kind of encounter parts. Like, why is there this fighting within me? Why is there this conflict within me? So are these like parts like real things, do you think? Like this comes up sometimes too. Is this just a way that we are just trying to describe, internal experience? Do these parts like really exist? Are we saying like there's these little kind of characters within us, like an inside out? Or is this like a metaphor, for you guys that it's just a way that we kind of describe these constellations of certain experiences, and it's a kind of shorthand to just kind of label a conglomeration of feelings and impulses and desires that all kind of go together, and
I like that question. My initial thought about it is I don't worry too much about that question and whether or not they're real. And maybe it's important, it's relevant, to some degree. And some people are debating about, who are smarter than me about that question. Maybe I'd say like, yeah, there's not actual little people inside of me, and I would definitely emphasize that I'm one person. I am only one person, and each of us is one person, and that's definitely true. But I'll borrow a little bit from you, Dr. Peter, on that. And something I remember you said to me once when I asked about this was maybe, I'm going to paraphrase, so, maybe you didn't say it exactly like this, but it's what I heard. Maybe parts are real in that sense, and maybe they're not. Maybe they're kind of analogies or like kind of neural networks, ways we describe certain neural networks that operate in certain ways. But that parts don't generally appreciate being referred to as neural networks or analogies. And so it just works better if we act like our parts are real and we operate in that way and relate with them as though they are real people we can relate with and love them in that way too. So that's my thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think their feelings are real. The emotions they go through are real. Do they look like little inside out critters? No, mine tend to look like, objects or jetpacks or things, That's just kind of how I can conceptualize them in my brain to be able to externalize it. But it gives language to all that stuff that gets all mucked up inside and gives a way to kind of visualize it. So no, I don't, I don't have anyone at my control booth running, pushing buttons or whatever. But the feelings are there behind that, whether there's a button physically being pushed or not.
yeah. So that's and I'm pretty much in alignment with where you guys are. Like, there's a phenomenological like pull or reality there. Something seems to be really going on. What I found, and maybe this is, we don't want to use pragmatism as the primary driver of our metaphysics. Okay, so we do have some folks that are thinking about this deeply, and we will be talking about some of this more later on this year in the podcast. But yeah, that it works to be able to interact like this inside. It really helps. And we are supposed to somehow relate with ourselves because, our Lord said, love your neighbor as yourself. That implies there has to be some kind of way of relating internally. For you to love yourself means that you're both the subject and the object of that love. And you're the one loving and you're the one receiving the love. And so, there's a challenge there for, I think, all of us to figure out how we're going to conceptualize that. What is that really going to look like? So, and this is the one that I found far and away of all the different models I've looked at, has this advantage of being able to, as you were saying earlier, David, understand, make sense of what our internal experience is.
That's something I've been thinking and talking to people about a lot recently. That is the thing, probably, if I could capture what I most love about IFS, is that it's relational. That just like deep right at its core, it's about relationship with myself. Well, relationship not only with myself, but with others and with God. It's relational. And that is also at our deepest core, who we as humans are, is relational, and it's why God created us, is to be in relationship with Him. So at the deepest level, it seems like it's got this alignment with who we are as humans.
So, how important is it to you, Marion, and to you, David, this breakdown of the roles of parts, right? Dick Schwartz, Richard Schwartz has talked about exiled parts. He's talked about manager parts. He's talked about firefighter parts. Um, what are we talking about with these, and how important is it to kind of make these determinations? Just curious
I
where
think
you
it
are with it.
depends whether you're asking my manager who wants to categorize everything and sort it all out, or asking the firefighter who is just like, just shut up. You know, for parts of me, it feels really important, but we use this exile manager firefighter kind of dynamic. I tend to go more into the specific or generalization of saying protectors, because I think that sometimes managers can be they can be a bully in our system, or they can be a mentor, depending, which is kind of what David was describing with his coach earlier. Or a firefighter can be a troublemaker, or it can be an advocate. And so there's kind of this, like, where's the part at? And there is a part of me that wants to spend a lot of time, and I have my clients love to do it. They bring in their list and they're like, is that a manager or a firefighter? And I'm like, just like, ask the part, just ask. Um, and is it helpful sometimes to think, okay, is this proactive or reactive? Yeah. Or is this one of those big feelings that just doesn't fit any place? There's the exile. So that's how I kind of look at it. What about you,
Um,
David?
yeah. Will it be helpful too here, just because of our focus for today, to give a quick
Yeah,
explanation
yeah,
of
definitely.
the roles of
Let's
parts
yeah.
and what we mean by that? Yeah, just for anyone who might not know. So basically in IFS, we have kind of two broad categories of parts, and some parts we call exiles, and these are the parts that when we have, say, traumatic experiences or difficult emotional experiences, especially when we're young, that we tend to take on some intense, maybe negative emotions or negative beliefs about ourselves, such as feelings or beliefs about, our own worth, like that I'm kind of worthless or not worth much, or that I'm all alone in the world, or that the world is not safe, or I'm never going to be safe, and so. But it would be too overwhelming to have that just be really front and center all the time, and so to protect us from that, one part can take on some of those intense negative emotions or overwhelming emotions or beliefs. And then other parts, these are the ones so the one that takes it on would be an exile. The ones that protect, that step up, we call protectors. And they're working to keep those exiled parts kind of out of our conscious awareness so that we're not too flooded with all of that intensity. And among protectors, we've got kind of two categories. Some of them are more proactive, or these we call managers, and they're really working to kind of proactively to keep exiles locked away and out of awareness. And that could look like, high achieving, perfectionism, or obsessing over little details to try to never make a mistake. Or I don't know if you guys have other examples of
I
that?
always think of if I do everything right, nothing bad will happen. That's my manager's rule. Get it all right so nothing bad happens.
Yeah, getting out ahead of it, right? That's that
Mhm.
proactive,
Yeah.
kind of drive to preserve things in at least a sort of reasonable state, so that things are
Mhm.
not spinning out of control. That's the proactive aspect of it that I think you were mentioning, David. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's the reactive aspect to it, where sometimes other parts can kind of take on these roles of being more reactive, and we call those parts firefighters, or we put them kind of in the categories of firefighters. Um, and they're the ones who will show up when the managers are not able to keep the exiles contained. And maybe something bad happens, we get some bad feedback or some mistake or something, and our exiles come flooding, an exile comes flooding forward with the intense feelings of, or threatening to flood with the intense feelings of shame or worthlessness or being overwhelmed. And then the firefighters step in, and their goal is to put out the flames by whatever means possible. That's why we call them firefighters. They're not really concerned with collateral damage. They will, kick the walls down so that they can get put the fires out. They'll drench everything. And so that could look like addictive behaviors, binging on various substances or behaviors to just kind of wash out the pain and get away from it. And it can have a lot of other negative uh, um, impacts, especially in the medium to long term. And they're focused on that short term time horizon. Anything you guys wanted to add to that?
I was just thinking, I heard, I've always thought about firefighters as douse the flames. That was kind of my, um, what I heard, what I took in and internalized, because that's what I was seeing in my system so often. But when I was doing one of my trainings with Cease, she was telling us that was Cease Sykes, that Dick's original reason for wanting to call them a firefighter was not to douse the flames, but to come in as the hero and save the day, to fix the problem that's going on. Now, doesn't always feel like that when it's an addictive part showing up, right? But for that moment, that part thinks it's solving the problem, which might be a good segue into some of the aspects of parts about them having good intentions and things like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's also probably worth just right before that segue to note that we are talking about roles of parts, and that's a point I think you were kind of bringing this up a little while ago, Peter. This is a point I've got hung up on sometimes is that we can kind of box parts in a little bit to like this is who the part is as a firefighter or a manager or an exile, but these are the roles parts get into, and it's not exactly who the part is. The parts are a lot more complex than that. There's a lot more to them, and especially as we get to know them more, um, and ultimately further down the road, help them to be more freed up from these roles that they've been stuck in or things. There could be quite a bit of more complexity in a good way, especially that comes to the surface with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
so important you brought that up. I'm glad that, yeah, because that doesn't always get addressed.
So, so actually, on that note, I don't always, kind of like you were saying, Marion, and you were hinting at Peter, like I don't get too hung up on is it a manager, is it a firefighter, what's the deal here? It's just like all parts are complex. Many parts can be kind of proactive and reactive a little bit. They could also carry intense emotions. And we just want to know the parts, just like if you're getting to know a person, a real person in the external world, you know, that they are multidimensional and there's a lot to that person and they're not just like this specific thing. There's a lot to them. Parts are just like a couple things that are really good to be aware of about parts is that they are inherently good and they always have good intentions. They're always trying to help. Even the parts that bring the say behaviors or the urges or impulses that seem bad or that maybe are sinful or harmful to ourselves or harmful to others, no matter how bad it might seem, that part always has a good intention. It's trying to help in some way, trying to help you. That's not easy to see sometimes. Yeah. It's like a lot of times people are thinking like, what good could this part possibly be trying to do? And we could probably throw out some examples of the types of things parts might bring that where people have a hard time seeing a good intention. But when we are doing IFS, we're always operating from that assumption that there's a good intention um, behind what the part's trying to do.
Yeah, so often people are come in and there's a part or multiple parts that carry a lot of anxiety, and they're like, I just want to get rid of it, just get rid of it, lop it off, be done with it. And it can be a real tough shift to begin to have the space to be able to hear, like, oh, this part is trying to help me in this way. It's telling me I needed to be alert or whatever. As a child, like I had to be alert to be safe. And it's, doing that same thing now as an adult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when we can really get to know our parts, which is a lot of what we're doing when we're doing IFS, is really seeking to understand the story behind the part, then just like you're saying, Marion, it starts to get a lot easier to see like
Mhm.
what it's actually trying to do. It might be
Yeah.
not doing a great job at it, doesn't have good strategies. Doesn't have the greatest strategies, they're not super effective, but like it's trying.
Yeah, I think of the line, love, how's the phrasing? Love the sinner, not the sin. And so loving the part, not necessarily the behavior that's coming along with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good distinction to make, especially for Catholics as we talk about this kind of thing, that parts are always good and we want to get closer to them and know them. People get really concerned real easily about like, are we kind of talking about like endorsing a sin? That it's okay to like we should love the sin, or that we make excuses for ourselves to sin in some way or do something
Mhm.
hurtful, and that's not what we're aiming for here. And
Right.
that's maybe, especially as Catholics, how we really understand and even adapt a little bit with IFS is we're coming from a framework where we have a morality here, that we know what's good and what's bad, what's right and what's wrong. And so we can approach our parts knowing we might know, right? Like there's something here that's, you know, not helpful. Um, but that we also know there's good intention and we want to love that part despite the, you know.
And we will have 5 episodes this coming year on this whole question of Catholicism and parts work, where we dive into some of that. So, but just a taste of it right now to let folks know that, we are considering those things. And it did come out also in episode 73, which I think is called something like, is IFS really Catholic? So you guys can check that out too, if you want something right now before we get to episode 166. We're going to be diving into this in a lot of depth because it's a really critical thing. This is really important that what we do here in Souls and Hearts on this podcast, that it be absolutely harmonized with what we know to be true by divine revelation. Very, very firm about that in Souls and Hearts and in this podcast. So,
Yeah, great. A couple of other things about parts then. Some of this maybe we've touched on a little bit, but parts can become burdened. And that's when we were talking about exiles, they take on the burdens of those difficult experiences that come from them. Protectors take on the burdens of their roles. So they take on these roles, but that they are not burdens. They are not the roles. So an angry part is not just anger, or a part that's bearing our shame is not just shame. it's a burden the part has taken on, and parts don't have to keep their burdens. They can be freed from their burdens, and that's one of the hopes we have as we work through this model. Parts can blend and unblend, and this means that parts can be kind of, you might say, dormant. They're not very active. But then, if something happens, a part can kind of take over and blend with the self, with you. An analogy might be like jumping in the driver's seat of the bus. And so we can have one part that just kind of shows up all of a sudden, or maybe gradually, but it's like this part's in the lead and driving the bus and taking control. But then we can build a relationship with our parts, and we can develop a sense of trust with them, and they can separate, they can unblend, they can give us some space and let us be more in the lead, so they're not taking over like that. So I think that's worth noting about parts. Another
Yeah.
point, maybe? Go ahead, Marion.
I was just going to say, I like the idea of realizing we're maybe never fully unblended. It's just about where the leadership is coming from. Is this part driving the bus or going off, doing its own thing? I used to play in a band, and there were 4 of us most of the time. We had a hammered dulcimer player, a bass guitar, I played rhythm guitar, and a flute player. And our hammered dulcimer player sometimes would get a little too enthusiastic, and he'd start playing a little too fast for the rest of the group. And I think that's kind of how parts work. Like, if we would follow his lead, then the dancers that were trying to dance to us would be really unhappy because they'd get really fast. And so we had to kind of bring it back down and kind of bring that instrument back into sync with the rest of the band.
Yeah. This is a really nice segue into talking about the self.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
self. All right. So this innermost self.
Mystical self that I hate that word, but yes.
Yes.
It's not my favorite word, but it's a good concept.
Self, you said? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Curious.
I have a part that thinks new agey when I hear that. And, I've been doing this for a lot of years, and it still kind of comes up. But I also have really seen kind of a very different vision that is not at all new agey, and if anything is really a fuller representation of our faith. And so most of the time that part will unblend.
Yeah. Are there other terms you like aside from the self?
I can't find a better one. Have you?
No.
I know.
I might, I know that Jerry Crete will say the innermost self, and this is scriptural, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that in these later episodes. Yeah. Or the you who's not a part. I know this is something Dick Schwartz
that feels weird.
would say maybe. Yeah, it's a little wordy, a little clunky.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've heard like the true self, but I've sort of pushed back against that quite a bit, actually, because it sort of implies that there's a false self, and that came out of some of the self-psychology from the 70s and the 80s, that sort of said, yeah, there's an outward-facing self, that's the false self, that's the image that one projects, and then there's the true self. And to translate that into IFS terms, that would sort of mean like, well, then a part is being called false, and I just react, because it's not that the part is false, it's just that the part is not the innermost self, so these parts are absolutely indispensable to the identity of a person. And so I just struggle with that whole true self, false self kind of way of explaining it. So I didn't give you one I liked. I gave you one I didn't like. That's not what you were asking for, David. But you can see I've got parts that are like really about that, right? Because they don't like that idea of like being labeled as false. So.
I do agree with you on that. And just to add to it, it's also that the part, whatever part maybe is kind of front and center, is not the whole.
Right.
And in that sense, it could be false if we're kind of projecting or operating as though this part of me is the whole me.
Right.
And that would be, maybe where the word false self applies. But just like you, I don't particularly like to use it, true self or false self. Um, and I totally get the concerns, Marion. I feel that too, especially if I say something like self energy, because sometimes we'll say that, like being in self, or because we're never just fully unblended, kind of like you were saying, we have maybe degrees of self energy being present. And, Catholics will easily get concerned about that, like, or what's this energy thing? So, but I say that if I'm saying self energy, I'm talking about, are we bringing the qualities forward that the self possesses? Which, just to put those out there real quick, because the self is the one within us who possesses these 8 C words, that 8 Cs, the 8 qualities that that the self can bring to the parts, which can be really helpful, healing. And those are calm, curiosity, connection, compassion, clarity, confidence, creativity, courage. So if I say self energy, I'm talking about how much do we have access to those qualities? How much are we able to bring them to our parts right now? But we skipped over kind of a definition of the self.
Yeah, I was
So
thinking that my part derailed us. I'm sorry. It gets on a tangent.
it's good stuff. Yeah. So I'll grab Dr. Peter's definition again and throw it out there.
You know how big we are
Definition.
in definitions here on this podcast. So, and I do spend a lot of time coming up with these definitions. So I do appreciate that you're bringing them in, David, Marion. Thank you for that.
We're not here to recreate the wheel. So we want to build off your work you've done. So definition of the innermost self, definition time. The core of the person, the center of the person. This is who we sense ourselves to be in our best moments, and when our self is free and unblended with any of our parts, it governs our whole being as an active, compassionate leader. In IFS, the self is the seat of consciousness. And so just to add to that, the self is meant to be a leader and guide to our parts. I liked it as a segue from what you were talking about, Marion, with the band members playing. And this is one of my favorite metaphors. It's kind of the orchestra, where you have the different members of the orchestra playing their various instruments. Each one's important and they have something beautiful to contribute. And then the self is the conductor. And the members of the orchestra, if they are well trained and they know each other well, that they've practiced together, then they can play beautiful music. And sometimes they don't need a lot of direction. They're just doing their thing, right? But the conductor's over there to lead and guide them, especially in more complex moments, to kind of step in and give some clear direction. Or if one member, you were talking about the hammer dulcimer, kind of gets away and picks up the pace or gets a little loud, that there's a conductor who could say, like, bring it down a little bit, buddy. Like, stay with us. We got this. Bring it up, kind of help the members to work together in a really, really good, really helpful way. Probably my favorite metaphor, at least right now.
Yeah, in our case, it was the bass player's foot that was acting as self, but that, whatever works, right? Yeah, I like to, I think it's a hard concept sometimes to wrap our heads around. And anyone who knows me knows I'm not the philosopher. But for me, it feels like it's the place in us where all the things that have happened to us or not happened to us or been done to us or not done to us or done by us or not done by us, i.e., all that stuff that's connected to our parts, isn't in the way of us and our connection to God. Like it's that pure, most unblemished part, because all that stuff, all the burdens that the parts have had to carry and the roles they've had to take aren't driving us in a more human response way. So,
the idea then in IFS is that the self doesn't ever go away or get really the words like blemished or burdened, but that when our parts can become very burdened and very active in different roles of protecting, that they can kind of crowd out the self so we don't have access to it. But it's still there and it still holds those 8C qualities which could be available to us, and that when parts are able to separate and give some space, not take over, not crowd out the self, kind of step back from the driver's seat, that the self can show up, even in someone who's, some of the most burdened individuals, that the self could show up and bring those qualities that we were talking about.
That was one of the striking claims about internal family systems, because when I was looking for some kind of model to help understand like what was going on within, well, first my clients as a psychologist, but then, more and more like within my own life, right, in my own system, that there was, first of all, an innermost self, that there was a one that was a leader or a guide within, because you don't see that in a lot of parts and systems types of models, right? You don't see that there's an actual, kind of self-equivalent in some of these other therapeutic approaches or other ways of understanding parts. But then what was even more striking is that that these qualities are said to be, by Richard Schwartz and those in IFS, inherent to the self. In other words, that they actually are not something that the innermost self develops through practice and skills and effort and experience, but that they're actually given to the innermost self. And so IFS is kind of a constraint-release model. Like, let's release the constraints so that these 8 C's, the calm, the curiosity, the connection, the compassion, the clarity, the confidence, the creativity, the courage, can shine through. I kind of think of it almost like the sun. The sun is like the innermost self, and the parts are like clouds, and so they can kind of occlude the sun to a certain degree, but the light still comes through, unless it's like 100% cloud cover that's so thick that it's like dark as night, right? Or the self can be kind of eclipsed. But if those parts can soften, relax back, allow some space for the innermost self to be more present, more active, to take on its sort of designated role to lead and guide the system, then these qualities shine through.
I wonder, Dr. Peter, you said lead and guide the system. I kind of feel like it might be important to make a distinction between self-leading and guiding and a manager leading and guiding, because they're not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things about the self is that it has this breadth of vision, right? It has the capacity to appreciate, to be fair, to be just to parts. It doesn't get caught up in just one particular point of view or agenda. So yeah, there's this ability to equitably, fairly, to lead and guide in a way that is good for all the parts. And in contrast, when a part is not in right relationship with that innermost self, when a part is freelancing, taking over because of its fears, its concerns, and its intentions to help, there's not going to be that perspective. There's going to be an attempt to silence other parts or to dominate other parts or to force things, where in a system that's being led and guided by that innermost self, there's more cooperation, more collaboration among the parts. There's a way of working together inside, so that there's a harmony in that multiplicity, and that really, I think, helps to bring parts together into the unity that we all are. Like, I think this IFS way of understanding the person captures both the unity of a person and the multiplicity of a person. So it's kind of like you were saying with that orchestra. The orchestra is one, right? It's one orchestra, but it's many, right? There are these different, components or different parts of the orchestra, the musicians and the conductor. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they play together cooperatively and collaboratively, where sometimes you hear all of them at once in a beautiful harmony, and sometimes you hear more of a feature of a section, or some will play kind of the background rhythm softer, and there's a solo, and it's like that's why I love this analogy so much, because it's
Mhm.
like how we our parts in right relationship with us are operating, is that sometimes maybe you're in a more of like a task mode and getting stuff done, and then sometimes you're just relaxing and enjoying. But it's like even the task manager needs to relax a little bit, and even relaxing parts, you know, can bring a kind of enjoyment to the work as it's being done. And this is kind of like an integration between um, different things. But that agenda that you were talking about, to really make that kind of concrete, if a manager is taking the lead and trying to guide the system, the internal system, it's a lot of times going to be focused on maybe one part in particular, or one concern in particular. And yeah, again, to make it more concrete, even like for myself and this kind of my coach, when he's more kind of the burdened mode and he's trying to run everything, um, he's focused on this exile that feels out of control, like chaos. It's chaotic. Kids are screaming. House is a mess. Siblings are fighting with each other. I got stuff to do. I didn't get it done. Um, and just like I'm out of control. And then that's what he's focused on right there, is just the one taking care of this part. And he's operating in that way. And that's just, he's not thinking about other things. That's kind of a reactive thing, right? Even though I had to think of that part as a manager, it's like both uh, here, um, versus the self can tend to the needs of this part internally more so, and kind of then uh, to get control of what can be taken control of and allow space for what can't and not.
Mhm. Yeah, I've heard it said that self's real desire is to lead with love and to be able to bring that love to all the parts in the system so that they can function in a more integrated way.
Yeah. Well, that's what this is all
About the
about.
ace. Mhm. I wanted to add about the eight C's being, and the qualities of self being inherent or innate. uh, what was coming to mind was a little baby, or like a 1 year old. And maybe this is a little easier for me to conceptualize right now because I have this little 1 year old. And this particular 1 year old is a little calmer and easier kind of than some of his siblings were. Um, but but these qualities of curiosity, connection, clarity, well, I don't know, confidence, creativity, courage. Like he will fall right out, walk right off a bed, and then go walk off the bed again. And he's curious and he's so connected. And you just see these qualities so clearly in a little one like that, and in little children. And then as hard experiences happen and parts start to become burdened and protectors step in, then these qualities are the ones that can start to feel unsafe and they get blocked out by parts stepping in. And so it goes to kind of the constraint release. Then our goal, what we're working towards, is to release those blockages that have kind of pushed away those qualities.
Well, I wonder if we can just briefly kind of discuss, like, when we're working with these parts, what are we hoping to get? What are we trying to do? What's the goal, or what's the end state that we're kind of looking for? Is it, is it just getting all these parts to be happy, or like what's the yeah, what's the vision here?
There's a handful of things for sure that we could consider on that. What comes to mind for you, Marion?
Well, I mean, I don't mean this in like a dismissive way, but really flourishing. And what does that look like with an integrated system? On a very simplistic level, all the children inside play nicely together, right? That's really what we're looking for. Um, but but when they are working together, then we really have the capacity to be what God is calling us to be and to love ourselves and to be able to share that love with others in whatever way our vocation has brought to us.
That's really, yeah, to me, that's really taking it like right to what's the end goal, maybe it's not quite the end, but it's closer.
Mhm.
Is loving and being loved, loving our parts. And when our parts have this deep felt experience of being loved and cared for, then it starts to free them up from the burdens that they've carried, to have new experiences because they take on those burdens from being not loved in the ways they needed to be, from a lack of love is what they're burdened by. And in loving them, and then being freed up from the burdens, the roles of protecting, then there's more of this freedom to just be free, to flourish, is a good word for it. But the word
Yeah,
integration,
that's what I like about that.
go ahead.
Freud said that the best that psychoanalysis could do was to help a person toward a normal level of human misery. You know, was sort of just to try to get people that were really troubled, serious, with neurosis, or he would say, to become not neurotic anymore. But what I'm hearing from both of you, and I agree with this, is that let's look for something that goes beyond that, and I have a lot of respect for psychoanalytic thought. I was trained psychoanalytically and I practiced that way for 15 years. I still think there's a lot of good to be found in there, um, but this actually brings in those really positive elements, right? Sort of a kind of an emphasis on not just the the resolution of pathology, and really a kind of embracing of what's good and true, what's beautiful, what's healthy, and gives guidance toward that. So
Yeah, that makes me think about, um, so I work with a lot of people dealing with addictive types of behaviors, and firefighters kind of taking on these roles, and some people will go sometimes to 12-step meetings at AA and whatnot, uh, and there's this frequent common idea, like once an addict, always an addict. And so I have a lot of people, especially to talk about IFS, they ask me, what do you think about that? And um, again, I see a lot of value in 12-step programs, and there's a lot of good that can come from them. But I think there can be a real underestimation about just how much a person can become free, can become freed up from those those burdens and those protective roles of parts, or how much parts can become freed up from the protective roles that they had. In IFS, yeah, it gives us this way of moving towards that.
Beautiful. Well, I'd like to, I know that when we talked about this before, before we met tonight, that you were willing to do an experiential exercise. So I'm wondering if this is a good point to transition into that. Um, yeah, to kind of
Hmm.
offer that for
That
folks.
sounds, yeah, that sounds great. Um, yeah, and we'll segue into that a little bit. And IFS is, so when you say experiential, I want to give a bit of an idea of what we mean by that, because so far we've been talking about IFS and giving kind of the model of it, the framework of it, and what it looks like, and what maybe the goals are, what we want to work towards. But then the question is, how do we do that? And it can be very easy to just kind of be in this mode of we're thinking about our parts and talking about them, and then we're trying to kind of make some changes in how we live our lives, and kind of like behaviorism there. It's going to change what I do and try to change that part and whatnot. Um, uh, but there's another thing to it. We don't just talk about parts when we do IFS. In fact, that might be blended with another part, an analytical part that's trying to figure out the other parts and what to do with them. Uh, and and that's also a
Put them in
part.
the Excel spreadsheet. Tried that.
Yeah, categorize them, box them up, put them where they belong. And well, even an analytical part like that can be trying to do all the things that self might do, like, bring balance and harmony and integration and love parts, but still be doing it on an analytical level of thinking about it. And that can be another protector. There could be reasons the part's doing it like that, but there's another way. Um, and so we don't just talk about parts, we can talk with our parts, and we can communicate with our parts, actually in other ways besides talking. In the external world, we can talk to each other with words. We can communicate in a way with images through our body language and whatnot. Um, and we can do all of that internally as well with our parts and more. We can communicate with our parts through kind of just through our body sensations and what we feel. We can connect with our parts in these ways. Um, as well as just kind of through a felt sense, kind of like a download of information, an exchange of information that occurs in a moment without words. And so this kind of stuff is what we're talking about when we say an experiential exercise, or kind of the methodology and how we do IFS. And I like this idea. I heard it from somebody. He said he didn't do IFS at all. He's some psychologist. And he said, if you ask yourself a question, you can get an answer. And he was kind of saying, don't think about it, don't analyze it, just ask yourself the question and wait. And an answer will come, can come. Doesn't always, but an answer can come. So it's not just this analysis. I like also the analogy of, like, say you see a person from a distance and they're doing something over there, and you're like, what's that person doing? And you're thinking about them, like, I'm trying to figure it out. It's like they could be thinking about this or that. But then you just walk up to the person, you talk to them, and you say, hey, what you doing? What are you thinking? And that's kind of the difference. Instead of just standing at a distance and analyzing our parts, we can connect with them and get to know them. And then it's not just guesswork. So, so to that end, we'll take a little bit of time here for what we call an experiential exercise. Maybe you would think of it like a guided meditation, and I'm just going to offer a little bit of guidance for you, the listeners, to help you to maybe meet, to connect with, and to learn a little bit more about one of your parts, or maybe a couple of your parts. And so as we shift into this, just a couple of words, a couple of things to be aware of as we do this. I'm going to be inviting you to maybe close your eyes if you're in a place where you can, and just to let yourself focus inside, closing your eyes if it's comfortable to you. And so just be aware of where you are. You don't want to do this while you're driving or operating heavy machinery. Um, you'll want to be in a place where you can maybe have some sense of privacy, free from interruption, if that's possible. If it's not, it's okay to pause this. You can come back to it later. Um, and as we go through this, it'll be maybe 7 or so minutes, give or take, somewhere around there. Just take whatever's useful. If anything I'm saying doesn't seem useful, totally okay. If you're not really staying with what I'm saying and you kind of find yourself going some direction that's good for you, just stay with that. Um, no, no obligation at all to stay with what I'm saying. And just be aware of your emotional state too while you're doing this. If you find you're getting really, really intensely activated, if there are some overwhelming feelings, or if you find yourself kind of shutting down, or or just feeling overwhelmed or too detached or disconnected in some way, it's totally okay to just step back. Sometimes it can be important to have some help when we do this type of work. And if you find that kind of thing happens to you, of really getting overwhelmed, then we'd recommend seeking some help with your IFS work through an IFS therapist or coach or someone. Um, so
And it's just important to remember that this is not therapy. Sometimes people say, oh, we're doing IFS, so we must be doing therapy. IFS is a much broader approach than therapy. It's used in a lot of different ways. And so when we do this, you might think of it like you had said, like a meditation or some guided imagery. We call it an experiential exercise. And so, yeah, so it's just an opportunity to kind of connect inside. And you don't necessarily need a therapist to do that. Lots of folks can connect inside without necessarily having help of the therapist. But if you do find that this is destabilizing you, then let it go. Reground yourself, shut it off. And it might be helpful in those situations, as it usually is, to have somebody accompany you with that. So,
yeah, thanks. As well as, if not much happens, if you find you just don't encounter much and it's just kind of blank, that's okay too. A lot of patience, a lot of gentleness. And, give it a shot again some other time, and can seek again some extra help with it. Um, so, um, so that being said, just gonna invite all the listeners to just settle in with where you are right now. If it feels comfortable, you can close your eyes. You want to let your focus just go inside to your inner world of thoughts, feelings, emotions, body sensations, images. And this is just a time for you to be with you, for you to be with your parts, to know your parts, to connect with them in some way. And so as you do this, just want to imagine kind of opening up some space inside. See if there can just be a little more space for you to be present with yourself, and just seeing what you notice. Maybe you notice something in your body, some sensation, some tension, some feeling. Maybe you notice some emotion that's present. Maybe you notice some thoughts that are in conflict with each other, or just some thoughts that are bothering you. Some thought maybe about what you're doing after this. And we're not trying to do anything with any of that right now, but really just observing and just noticing. And whatever you're with, whatever you're noticing, just check in to see and ask yourself, how do I feel toward this part right now? How do I feel toward this sensation, this feeling, this thought? And looking for, do you notice a sense of curiosity toward that? Of wanting to understand and know a little bit better? A sense of compassion, of openness, of warmth. If you notice that, great. If not, that's okay. And just see what you do notice. If you feel more hesitant, fear, resistance, then that's another part. And just want to see if you can welcome whatever other part might be showing up. And if that part could sit with you nearby as you work with this one, the first one. And check again to see, how do you feel toward this first part? And if you feel a sense of curiosity, then in whatever way makes sense to you, just want to extend that to the part. Let it sense that curiosity from you. And just an invitation from to that part. What do you want me to know about yourself or about me? And just take a minute with that. And if you are receiving anything, whatever you're getting, you just want to thank the part for that, acknowledge it. Just let it know that you're getting that. And you can ask that part, what do you do for me? What's your job? How do you help? If there's not much coming, that's okay. And if there is, again, just let that part know what you're hearing, just acknowledging it. Maybe there's a sense of appreciation for that part for some of you. as you understand a little bit better. And if there is, just express that to the part. Thank you for your good intention, for your efforts, your hard work. And moving towards wrapping up this exercise, but just stay with it a little bit longer if there's a part there. Maybe one more question, just asking that part if there's anything it would like from you, anything that would be helpful for the part. Maybe there's something you could do. Maybe it wants you to check in and say hello sometimes. Maybe it just wants you to give it a comfortable chair to sit in. You can offer whatever that part might want. And a lot of gratitude to that part. And if there was any other that showed up that gave you space to stay with this one, a lot of thanks to that one as well. And if this is a really good place for you, then you could feel free to pause and just stay with it a little longer. And otherwise, just going to invite you to just kind of shift, focus back outside, opening the eyes, coming back into the space you're in. Okay.
Thank you, David. I'm curious. I mean, I certainly had some experiences, but I'm curious, Marion, if there were things that you might want to share about what that was like for you, once you entered into that experiential exercise.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to. It was nice. I mean, sometimes we get so busy that we don't quiet ourselves. Like, I feel like sometimes my check-ins are um, short and sweet and in between clients or whatever. So it was really nice to have that space. Yeah, for me, what I noticed was a part, because I had talked about playing in the band. There was a part that felt some nostalgia. And because I really haven't played my guitar because it hurt. I had hand problems. And so I had kind of stopped playing maybe back in 2004 after I went to Ukraine.
Wow.
And yeah, so that part was missing it. Um, I've played since I was like 12, so it was definitely a part that helped me through some really tough times. So just kind of sitting with that and appreciating that that part um, misses that playing, and also noticing, well, I've had 3 hand surgeries in the last year, and in theory, I should be able to play again.
Ah,
Um, I haven't tried it yet for a variety of reasons. Not the least of which is that timekeeper back there that says, you don't have any time for that. Uh, but I think there's a part that's like, yeah, maybe we should pull that out and see what it feels like. Um, Yeah. And I think there was a question you asked in there, David. I think it was, what does this part do for you? And I kept the thing that came to me so clearly was, it brings me joy. Um, just yeah. I mean, there's other parts that I think that's really interesting when I look back at my history of playing and stuff like that. But yeah, so it was just a really um good experience of being able to connect with a part that I haven't in a while. Or I'm not even sure, like it's not like I can say, oh, that's this part or whatever. Um, so it's newer space for me to kind of explore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah. What about you, Peter?
Is really interesting because it was different than what I've been coming up with in a lot of ways in my own parts check-ins and my own part sessions where I work with my parts connect. But I had two of my managers up. My evaluator part, which is my former inner critic, but still evaluates, and then my collaborator part, which is my get it done part, the one that really kind of, it's probably the equivalent or the counterpart to your taskmaster, that you mentioned. And they were both all about sleep, like not necessarily getting more sleep, but just getting better sleep, and I've started to exercise again very regularly more lately, and it's leading to some difficulties with sleep. But just sort of maybe there's some things we can do to care more about sleep. And so that was interesting coming from them, because usually the concerns about sleep come from a different part, and so I'm beginning to wonder, maybe there's more to this than just one part that has concerns about whether I'm sleeping enough or sleeping well enough. So there's some space to kind of explore that more deeply with my part. So I'm grateful. But yeah, two managers, and that those two actually sort of also settled down. One of them, my evaluator, was like, "We still got good sound. How's the podcast coming along? Is everybody's lighting okay? Sort of some of those sort of technical things." But it was good to be able to let go of some of those concerns for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And
I wonder what was coming up for you, David,
yeah,
as you were doing that, like for a podcast. How was that on your
yeah.
Well, I'll answer that. And I also wanted to say that just listening to you guys share those, just how awesome it is that there's always more. It's like no matter how long we've been doing our own personal work in whatever way, or working with our parts, that there's just this way where we can have an ongoing relationship with our parts. It's not just like you do some therapy. I mean, could just do some therapy and IFS therapy and kind of deal with some issues and then go on, but you can have a lifelong relationship with your parts in a really good way. And whenever we face different challenges, just like there's a way here to work through these challenges, and also just to have a great loving relationship with parts. So that came up for me as I was listening to you both share right there. For me, during the experiential, it's a little harder to say because I find a lot as I'm doing something like that I'm just kind of right. I'm almost a little blank. I'm almost just a little bit just right with following the thread of wherever I am right in that moment. But I was aware at a couple of moments that one part thought, how am I doing here with this thing? Especially since you mentioned doing this experiential with a bunch of people listening, or gonna listen. Uh, and so this part there's a little fear with it. Like, how am I doing here? And I think I saw Peter open his eyes and it's like, what's he looking at? What did I say? Did I say something bad? Did I do the wrong thing? And this part that kind of looks out for my lookout part. top of the mast on the ship or up on top of the house, kind of just looking out for mistakes or threats or problems or something that could be a problem. And so that part did show up at least once. And uh, I don't remember exactly, but in some way, maybe without words exchanged, really uh, peeked his head out, and it was like, hey, it's all right. We can just stay with this. I'm a beloved son of God. Even if I make mistakes or if I said something bad or wrong or something, uh, it's okay. I'm allowed to do that. And I haven't done an experiential exercise on a podcast with however many listeners you have now before. So uh, I'm not needing to do this perfectly ever, actually, and especially not for the first time. So,
Yeah, and I'm so grateful that you were able to do this because you have a different style than I have, than Marianne has, and it's so important to bring those voices in. And I just want to invite our viewers, our listeners, if you're checking us out on YouTube, you can, if your parts feel good with this, if it seems right and good, if it doesn't seem like it's overexposing or steamrolling any of your parts, you can share your experience of that exercise in the comments, and we would love to connect with you there, and so forth. So, well, we're kind of landing this. So I'm just wondering if there's one or maybe one and a half key takeaways that each of you would like to leave us with, as we think about those that are listening that might be very new to IFS. What is one thing that you might want them to remember?
Mm. Well, I feel like I want to just, on that half thing, offer David's parts compassion for having been in this situation. I know what it was like when I was guest hosting the podcast a while back and doing a session. I have a lot of compassion for those parts, but just want to offer reassurance. I didn't hear anything bad. I appreciated the experience. Um,
thank you.
yeah, but for takeaways, we are just scratching the surface of this. And we talk a lot about parts and names and things like that. But I think the most important thing that I would encourage people is to have curiosity about your own system. What's coming up? What's going on inside of me? Because you deserve to have that attention given to your system. And because when you do that, then you will have a greater capacity to love.
Mm.
Beautiful.
I wanted to emphasize that point that you just made, Marion, that this is not just um, self-absorbed navel gazing. Um, it can be kind of easy to be scared off by that idea or that concern, maybe especially amongst Catholics, um, and ideas about kind of death to self, and to forget yourself and to love others, and to hate yourself. And uh, but there's a way where we can understand those things does does connect with this work that we're doing here, and to take and that Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, and the implied part is you love yourself, and we have to love ourselves. Um, and I know that some future episodes are going to spend some more time with these things, and so right to Marion's point, don't be scared off. If there are questions, like Marion was saying, for yourself, like within yourself, about yourself, but even if there are questions about this type of way of thinking of yourself or the approach of IFS, then it's good to bring curiosity, and actually ask those questions. And there can be pretty good answers, actually. And maybe the last thing that I just want to emphasize that came up kind of recently is, and we've touched on it today, but is uh, the name internal family systems and emphasis on the word family here. That that IFS is relational, and that we are in relationship with ourselves and meant to be in relationship with ourselves, and not in just some kind of like um, temporary way or kind of dry or cold or calculated way, but in a very real relational way that's kind of imperfect and messy. And so I think that's my landing point.
I'm so grateful that both of you were here and that we had this time together for this podcast episode. It's really been on my heart as I discern, pray about, I'm going to see what God's will is for this podcast, to be bringing in your voices and to, be using this podcast as a platform. We've moved away from me doing just solo casts, and that there's no promise that I will never do a solo cast again. But now we're at the point where there's so many other Catholic, professionals that are coming up, just like with you, with these new approaches and these details. So super excited that we are able to work together on this. And so just a lot of gratitude from my innermost self and from my parts to both of you. So just so grateful. Okay, so super excited. We have launched this whole year-long series, 2025, a deep dive into internal family systems. And our upcoming episode, What is the Innermost Self? That'll be episode 158 with Dr. Jerry Crete, Dr. Peter Martin. That will be coming out on January 20th, 2025. I'm just going to encourage you, if you liked this episode, get onto YouTube, like, comment, and especially subscribe. We'd love to have more subscribers because that'll help us get the word out to more and more people who are finding us on YouTube. So also, just so you know, if you're on the audio version, we have slides, pictures, some B-roll, things like that on the YouTube version. So if you're used to listening to us wherever you get your audio podcasts, we're also on video. Conversation hours with me, Dr. Peter, every Tuesday and Thursday from 4:30 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You can call me on my cell phone, 317-567-9594, between 4:30 p.m. and 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, any Tuesday or Thursday, for a brief conversation, up to about 10 minutes or so, about anything that's in this podcast or in any of the other materials that we put out through Souls and Hearts. The Resilient Catholics community is opening for new members next month. So if you are a Catholic who recognizes the need for structure in your human formation, in your life, and you want a program in a community of like-minded Catholics in relationship with Catholics in small groups, journeying together toward loving God wholeheartedly and our neighbors as ourselves. And if this parts and systems thinking, if this IFS stuff is interesting to you, that's what the RCC is all about. Check out the Resilient Catholics community. You can do an internet search, or you can go to our landing page at soulsandhearts.com/RCC. We have about 400 members. We're in the process next month. If you're watching this as it comes out, February 2025, we are onboarding our new cohort. So soulsandhearts.com/RCC. Marion, who is with us today, is the lead navigator. So for those of you who are formators, I'm talking Catholic therapists, counselors, coaches, spiritual directors, anyone who accompanies others individually in their formational work, I have something for you. There's an old Latin saying, nemo dat quod non habet. You can't give what you don't have. And if you are in doing formation work with other people, you probably know, some part of you knows, that you need your own human formation work as well. So come and join us in the Formation for Formators community. I'm asking you to consider how you are working on your own human formation. Human formation is the basis of all formation, according to St. John Paul II in his apostolic exhortation, Pastoris Dabo Vobis. You need to get that right. You need to get that right in your life. And if this whole approach of parts and the innermost self and systems thinking, the multiplicity of self, if that appeals to you, you don't just want to start working with somebody else in it. You really want to work with your own parts. You really want to work with your own system so that there's not negative consequences that happen when you begin to work with somebody else. So I see it all the time. I want you to know that we are providing solutions and answers to you. The Formation for Formators community in Souls and Hearts will be starting up with new Foundations experiential groups. These are groups of 9 people with a IFS trained facilitator. That'll start in early March 2025. It's an excellent opportunity for you to engage in your own human formation, informed by internal family systems and parts and systems thinking, all grounded in an authentic Catholic understanding of the human person. We're working on removing the beams from our own eyes before we begin to examine the specks in the eyes of those we accompany. So to find out more, check out the Formation for Formators community at soulsandhearts.com/FFF. And within that, I want to mention that Marion Moreland is offering a Foundations Experiential group on Wednesdays from 9 o'clock a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, starting on March 12th, 2025. David Edwards is offering his Love One Another group. That's an advanced group in the FFF, the Formation for Formators group. That'll be on Thursdays from noon to 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, starting on March 13th, 2025. And so, with that, we're gonna bring this episode to a close again with a lot of gratitude in my heart. Just so appreciate the time together, and we'll invoke our patroness and our patrons, Our Lady, our Mother, Untier of Knots.
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph.
Pray
for us.
Saint John the Baptist.
Pray for us.